Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today I will be doing my February wrap-up. In the month of February, I read 11 books, so that is the best reading month that I have had in a very long time, and I'm very happy with that. However, I didn't read all of the books that were actually on my TBR, and we can get into that. But if you wanted to see what books were originally going to be on my TBR for the month of February, you can check out my February TBR, in which I did my very first TBR game, which is a Jeopardy TBR game that I created myself, and I had a lot of fun doing that, but I didn't read two of the books that I chose, but I will talk about those in a little bit. I also have started to use Storygraph, which is sort of like Goodreads, but a little bit better, and it has actually tracked like the amount of pages that I read and like all my star ratings and just stats in general. So I'm gonna go through that a little bit as well, because I know that a lot of people like to see the statistics of what I and other readers have actually read. So I'm gonna get into that a little bit now. So in the month of February, like I said, I read 11 books, and over those 11 books, I read a total of 3,466 pages. I also read a few audiobooks, but I still like counted those pages of the actual book length in the amount of pages that I read, even though I listened to it, but I'm still going to count it. I read 1 2-star read, 1 2.5-star read, 5 3-star reads, so it was definitely a 3-star month for me, 2 4-star reads, and 2 5-star reads. So I read 2 of my favorite books of the year in February, which is awesome. Well, 2 of my favorite books of the year so far, at least. Hopefully I read quite a few more. 8 of those books actually were between 300 and 499 pages, and then 3 of those books were less than 300 pages, so like novellas and things like that. 9 of the books that I read were fiction books, and 3 of them were young adult, contemporary, and fantasy. 1 of them was sci-fi, 2 of them were adult fantasy, and 3 of them were romance. So I had a good variety of reading there, and then the final 2 books that I read were actually nonfiction. So that's exciting. I am starting to read more nonfiction, which is cool to also see in my statistics. But yeah, let's get into the actual books that I have read. So first we're going to go through the books that I wanted to read for my February TBR. And I wanted to read, I believe it was 7 books, and I read 5 of the 7. So let's just briefly talk about the 2 books that I didn't read, and I will also mention the prompts that I got for that. So if you don't know what my TBR game is, I have 6 categories, just like in Jeopardy, and in each of those 6 categories there are 5 prompts. So I roll the die once, I get the category, and then I roll it a second time and I get the prompt. So for this one that I didn't finish here, I'm gonna look off my cheat sheet. I landed on the miscellaneous category, and the prompt was a classic. And so I ended up choosing North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. So I didn't actually finish this one, although I did start it. Let's see how far I got into it. I read 59 pages, so that would also add into the amount of pages that I read over the course of the month, but I didn't count it. But I read 59 pages, and I will hopefully still continue to read this because I am enjoying it. I just didn't finish it. It is a classic, so it moves a bit slow for me, but I am enjoying the romance aspect, so that's really cool. And then the other one that I didn't finish, I had landed on a daily double, which meant that I had to choose 2 books for the next prompt that I landed on, and I happened to land on the fantasy category. And so I had to choose 2 books for that category and that prompt, and the prompt was book on your TBR the longest, and I read one of them that I chose, but I didn't read this next one, and that was Providence of Fire by Brian Staveley. I still really want to read this one. I mentioned it in the books that I want to read, like the series that I want to read in 2021. I had read the first one. This is the second one of that series, The Chronicle of the Unhewn Throne. So this is the second book, and I just didn't have time to get to this one, unfortunately. I did read like the first chapter, so I guess that counts for something, but hopefully soon this will go up on another TBR because I do really want to read this one. Now onto the 5 books that I actually finished for my TBR. So the first one that I finished was for the prompt category romance and the prompt read a book that is a primary color, and for that one I ended up choosing and reading Conventionally Yours by Annabeth Albert. This one I ended up giving 3 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it, but I found it rather dull in some places. This is a male romance following 2 young men in college who are really into this like this card trading game type thing where you like battle people, and they decide to go on this road trip out to a convention in order to participate in a contest that will allow them to win like a big prize at the end, and both of them need this amount of money for their own particular reasons, and it's of course their journey from a hate to love relationship. They are really, really cute, and I enjoyed the romance aspect of it. However, when it came to them actually playing the game itself, I was quite bored. That's really not my thing, and they go into quite a lot of detail about the game, and I just really thought it was a little boring in those places. Although I really liked how it wrapped up, and I enjoyed the romance, so I did quite enjoy it, so I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I do recommend it for anybody who is looking for a male romance book, because it was fun and cute, and there was one part where there was only one bed. So you usually know how that goes, but yeah, it was cute, and I would recommend it, just probably won't read it again. I'll probably end up getting rid of it. My next role landed me on the YA category, and for that prompt, it was a standalone, and so I chose An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. This is not a sequel or anything, but the same author of A Sorcery of Thorns, which I loved that book, so I was really excited to read this one. However, it wasn't great. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, so I did enjoy it, but I just was bored. I thought it was kind of juvenile at times, but basically this follows the main character who is an artist, and she is part of the like human world, but where there are fae people also, and she is tasked with painting the portrait of this fae prince of one of the courts, basically, and she ends up painting emotion into his eyes, which is really looked down upon, and it gets him in a lot of trouble. So he comes back for her and like kidnaps her kind of into his world, and so from there, it just kind of takes off, and them going from, again, it's a hate to love romantic relationship, but it was juvenile. There was some like conversation pieces that I didn't connect to, and I thought didn't fit with this. Also, it's kind of like short to be a fantasy. Sometimes fantasies I know can be short. There are novellas and things like that, but I wanted it to be explored a bit more. They kind of just like dove headfirst into a love relationship, even though he had kidnapped her. She automatically was already in love with him, and I just don't like that kind of thing in books. So I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I mean, it was cool for a standalone, but it's not one that I'm going to reread anytime soon, and I will probably forget about it. Another one that I read from my TBR was for the Daily Double, where I had to choose 2 books for the prompt, and it was for the fantasy category for a book that was on your TBR the longest, and for that one I chose and read A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. I had this book on my TBR for years, and I also have the second one on my TBR as well, but this one I really, really enjoyed. This was actually the last book that I read in the month of February. I read it the very last day, finished it rather, the very last day on the 28th, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It was great. I don't know why I took so long to actually read this, because I loved the characters. I loved the aspect of different like parallel worlds and Londons, and I kind of was really interested in the fact that the worlds are different, and it just so happened that each world has a London in it, like a city named London. So that was kind of cool. But I loved the action. I loved the little mystery from it, and the characters, Kel and Lila, were just amazing. And now I see why everybody was telling me to read this, because Lila's great. Kel is too, but Lila is really, really cool. And I have some theories about her. I haven't been spoiled for this series, even though it's been out and finished for a while. But I have some theories about Lila. So I can't wait to continue this series, and I'm really glad that I was able to finish this one. I flew through it, and I constantly wanted to pick it up and read it. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one, and one of my favorite books of the month. Definitely not a 5-star, but it was one of my favorite books that I read, so that was really cool. The next prompt that I had was for the sci-fi category, and that one was actually for a mood read. So I didn't actually pick a book for this, because I had the opportunity to choose a book throughout the month, like any book that I wanted that was a sci-fi book, and read it. Whatever fits my mood. But for this one, I read the novella Sun Daughters and Sea Daughters by Amy Ogden, which is fairly new. I think it had just come out in February, and it was kind of stated to be a Little Mermaid retelling, but like set in the future in kind of like a post-apocalyptic world where the human race is in space as well, but also has changed into other kind of beings to be able to fit the environment around them. So there is a clan that is in the sea, and the main character is actually from the sea, and she ends up falling for a land dweller. And so she goes to this witch and asks her to allow her to go on land, to have legs, because she was kind of like a mermaid type figure, so to have legs and be able to breathe the air. And she ends up falling in love with the land dweller and living with him and his clan, when all of a sudden him and his people come under this plague, and she needs to figure out a way to stop it. So she goes back to the witch, who has changed from a female to a male, which is interesting. So that's kind of cool representation in there. But then it's them traveling through space to go to another planet that will help create a cure for the plague. So it is about her growth, the main character's growth, as well as coming to terms with her relationship with her friend, who is the witch, and then her own relationship with her husband, who is the land dweller. So it was kind of cool to see those two dynamics, and the ending was really well done. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars because I kind of wanted a little bit more to it. Even though it is a novella, I should have been expecting that, but I wanted a little bit more. I was enjoying it, and I think it has potential to actually be like a full-length novel and really kind of delve into that world and the dynamics of it. But I did enjoy it, and I do recommend it. It was a good retelling, and it was unique, so I do recommend it. And then the last prompt from that February TBR was a fantasy prompt, and it was to read an arc. And for this one, I ended up reading and finishing my most anticipated book of the year, and it was my first 5-star read of the year as well. And that is She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. This book, oh my gosh. So it was a little slow-paced in the sense of there is not a lot of action. It's more about political intrigue, but it follows the main character, who you never learn her name in the beginning, but she disguises herself as her brother to infiltrate, not really infiltrate, but to save herself. She joins a monastery, but only men can join that. So she disguises herself as her brother and takes her brother's name in order to become a monk. And then it's following her from when she's young, probably like 11 to early 20s. It's her journey as a monk, as well as kind of on this quest for power. in a way. And she is definitely a character that is very morally gray. So if you were looking for a strong character but that has questionable goals, then this would be the book for you. There's amazing representation in this because you also kind of get the sense that the main character more so sees themselves as a boy rather than a girl, but I'm gonna say they just because we don't know their pronouns, they also fall in love with a woman, which is amazing. And there's an interesting sex scene in this, so people have already talked about it before, but it's quite interesting, and I have never read it in a novel before. But yeah, it was really, really enjoyable. If you are looking for a good kind of slow-paced political fantasy, this one would be the one for you. It was amazing. Also, the evil character, because there's not actually evil characters. Let's just say that right there. All of them are morally gray. They all have questionable goals. Every single one of them. But I loved them all. And the guy that I'm talking about is a eunuch. So there's that, too. He is also very, against women. So that's not great for him. But I still really liked him. And he had his reasons. But I'm kind of interested to see where that relationship goes in the next one. But this one comes out in July, so I would have to wait a very long time to read the next books. But I did enjoy this one. 5 out of 5 stars. I loved it so much, and I'll definitely be picking up a final copy when it releases, because this is probably an all-time favorite at this point. Now onto the books that weren't part of my TBR. I ended up listening to 4 audiobooks this month, so I'm going to chat through those ones right now. I ended up listening to the audiobook of Broken in the Best Possible Way by Jenny Lawson. So this one is a memoir by Jenny Lawson, and I did really enjoy it. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars because it was just hilarious, but there were parts that I was kind of a little bit bored by, but I enjoyed it because of how hilarious it was. And the audiobook is actually narrated by Jenny Lawson herself, I believe, so that made it 10 times better. And it just kind of deals with tough topics in her life, but also in the world around us. So it was kind of a refreshing read to listen to, and there were many times that I laughed out loud. So I would recommend this as a memoir kind of listening experience rather than actually reading it, but I did enjoy it, and I think that there are people who could really connect to Jenny. And then I listened to The Edge of Falling by Rebecca Searle, and I didn't really like this one, unfortunately. This is a young adult contemporary following a high school girl who saves another classmate from jumping off of a roof and committing suicide. So obviously there's a trigger warning right off the bat for suicide. However, the main character has her own secrets. She was up there for another reason. And she has had a tough life. In the recent past, her sister has passed away. She's trying to cope with that and move on from that traumatic time in her life. She has also broken up with her boyfriend, so she doesn't really have anybody around. Her older brother's away at college, and he's really has been the only one that she could talk to besides her best friend who lives downtown. They live in New York City, by the way, so that's an interesting side to it. But I listened to it and I just thought it was meh. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. I don't really recommend it. It's very short. So I guess if you wanted a short book to read or listen to, this could work for you. There are very many trigger warnings, like I said, especially for suicide and loss of a sister. And drugs, I think, is in this possibly as well. But I just kind of was bored throughout it. And I knew exactly where it was going from the beginning. So there was no aha moment. So I was kind of bored, and I was happy when I finished it. Although there are some things in here that I think could help a lot of people. So I did give it 2 out of 5 stars. It wasn't like it was absolutely dreadful. It was one that I did think was okay. I was just bored. And then I listened to the audiobook of Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers. This is my second 5-star of the year and the second one for this month, and it was phenomenal. This one follows our main character Grace, who is in her late 20s. I believe she's like 28, and she has just gotten her, I think, PhD in astronomy. She decides to celebrate, and she goes to Las Vegas, and she gets really drunk and ends up marrying another woman named Yuki, and who she had never met before. So the story takes off from a point where Grace is questioning her own goals and her future as an astronomer, and where she wants to go from there. So in order to kind of come to terms with that, she decides to visit Yuki in New York City and get to know her new wife, who she had never met before. And her new wife, Yuki, has her own like podcast on the radio, and it's about mythological creatures, and it's great. And there are just so many quote-worthy lines in this book, and it was beautiful, and I think it's really meant for the millennial generation, the late millennial generation. Like, I'm 26, and I connected to this so hard. It had a lot to do with figuring out your path in life and realizing that maybe you don't have to have everything figured out. Like, you have a lot of time to plan things and get your life situated, and you don't have to have it figured out at 26. You don't even have to have it figured out at 20. Like, you don't even have to have it figured out at 30. Like, there's just so many opportunities to just, like, move on. So that made me connect to this so much. But I loved the representation in this. All the side characters have some sort of LGBTQ plus rep in it, and I just can't wait to see where Morgan Rogers goes, because I loved this one so much. I also listened to an audiobook of Women and Other Monsters by Jess Zimmerman. This is a nonfiction, very, very short, but this one is pretty much about Jess Zimmerman analyzing women and female monsters like the Gorgons and Medusa and things like that, and then connecting it to the women's experience now. And it was really well done in that aspect. However, there were parts where she kind of delves into her own, like, experiences, and that is okay in order to connect it to it overall, but then it became more of a memoir, and I really wanted more analyzing in it. So I did enjoy it for the monster aspect of it and how it can connect to us now, and basically women and people who identify as women to kind of reclaim the things that were said as being horrible, like, you know, ambition and goals and even hunger. Like that is not a bad thing and should not be looked at as a bad thing, because the people who wrote these stories and kind of the ones that we know now were men, and so they were the ones that told us about that those things were bad, and now it's time to reclaim it. So that whole goal was very interesting, and I think that was a good message. So I did enjoy that aspect. I just didn't enjoy the fact that it was kind of like a memoir as well. In the end, I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, so I thought it was, like, good, just probably could have been way better. And then there were 2 books that I just kind of read. I did not listen to the audiobook or anything like that. I just read them. One is The Truth Project by Dante Medema, and this one is a YA contemporary that is written in verse, so it's all, like, almost poetry in a way, and it just kind of follows a girl figuring out what her, like, senior project is going to be, and she decides to write a poem about it and kind of connect to her ancestry. She ends up taking a DNA test, and she figures out a family secret. So it's her coping with that knowledge in poetry form. So it was, like, beautiful and, like, really fast-paced. I read it in a day because it is only written in verse, so you can read it fairly quickly, and some of the lines were quite beautiful, but it's not anything that's gonna stick with me. I think it could have been done better. The cover is beautiful, I will say that. It is already out It came out last year, at the end of last year. I just didn't have a chance to read the arc. But I gave it 2.5 out of 5 stars. I think it could have been better, but I think people can connect to it. So if this sounds like something you might be interested in, you should give it a shot. And then finally, I read Written in the Stars by Alexandria Bellafleur. This is an adult romance, which follows 2 women, Elle and Darcy, and they go from a hate to love romantic relationship. It follows them after they go on this blind date together, and it's disastrous, but Darcy ends up lying to her brother about it and saying that it went really well. So then they kind of have to get together and pretend that they like each other, and then inevitably they do. So it was really cute, and I read this like back to back with Honey Girl, and there were very similar topics and themes in it, which I thought was kind of fun and cool. So I would recommend reading these kind of next to each other, because it was kind of cool to see the similarity between the two. Elle is into astrology, but used to be an astronomer, and we have Grace in Honey Girl, who is an astronomer. So it was that aspect that was just like a small tidbit of it, but it was kind of cool, and I did enjoy this one. Gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I highly recommend it. It's an amazing sapphic romance for sure. Okay, so there you have it, everyone. Those were the 11 books that I finished in the month of February. Please comment down below and let me know if you have read any of these books and what you thought about them. I would love to know. Please like this video and subscribe if you aren't already, and I will see you all next time. Bye!